Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well, especially because we are taking a bit of a detour today, Walt. We're doing something we try not to do too much here on Awesome Truth. We try and stick to something more tangible a lot of the time, a book, a documentary, a movie, an interview. But we've done so many episodes at this point. We've read so much. We've learned so much. We're amateur wrestling historians, as we call ourselves occasionally. And something's been going on in wrestling over the last couple weeks and months that has really stood out and sort of changed the landscape. And it happens all the time. It's not something new to this, sort of period. But I think it's just something that we felt like we wanted to talk about. Well, and of course, I'm talking about injuries. I'm talking about Cody Rhodes, I'm talking about CM Punk, all of these guys and sometimes girls who go down for long periods of time, and their disappearance moves mountains, and things change, and plans are upended, and it's been a part of the business, an incredibly physical business, obviously, but I think now with like all the money and all the long-term planning and all the focus on what comes next and weekly shows, like someone just getting hurt at this point in time really just sort of disrupts everything and I would say maybe not unique ways, but certainly profound ways.
Yeah, and injuries are, part of the business, and they're always unfortunate. I also think that after reading so many damn books and watching so many damn documentaries, it's like we kind of have a nice array from just a wide catalog of just like people's different opinions on what it means to be injured and like what the appropriate like thing to do is when a performer gets injured. We'll get more into it, but like everybody seemingly has a different philosophy on it, which, I think has good intentions sometimes, but and also has bad consequences. So it's dissecting injury through those lenses too, and ultimately understanding like where do we net out as a result.
Yeah, and of course, what you're referring to is Cody Rhodes. I would say most obviously in his recent match at Hell in a Cell, which is such a good summation of what you're talking about. It creates this iconic moment. This guy shows up with a very visible injury. I wasn't watching the show, but just seeing the injury on social media, you're like, oh my God, Cody is as hurt as he sounds, if not worse. And then goes on to have a great match, and that'll be remembered as much as any Hell in a Cell match post, Foley Undertaker maybe is in that range, in that category of one of the most memorable, if not the best. But at what cost? Should he have been out there at all? Like, it's 20 years ago, it would have been a no-brainer. Like, of course you go out there. Like 30 years ago, even more so. Like, put on the show, perform for the fans. Like, whatever happens after happens. If you die 10 years early, well, that's the life of a wrestler. The show must go on. But I think now we're a little more mature. Like, even a Vince McMahon WWE type company doesn't seem as hell bent on running you out there regardless of your current state. But then you lose that iconic moment. So like, where's the balance? Where's the line? What risks are worth taking? What risks aren't? Like, I think these are questions we're asking a little more, which we should be, because it's a person's health, it's a person's livelihood and life in the balance.
Yeah, I think the Mick Foley Hell in a Cell and the Cody Rhodes Hell in a Cell are good parallels, because even though they happen like got to do the math real quick, but like 24 years apart.
Yeah.
It's still like those are going to be the two most remembered Hell in a Cells ever for very similar reasons. Like,
what about the one where Rikishi fell into a truck, though?
Could you tell me when that was and who else was in it?
All I know is they were like, oh, who's the worst guy in this match? Oh, Rikishi, you're going to fall into a truck full of mattresses, and did not have the same impact as...
Why they had the 400-pound guy do that versus anyone else is beyond me, but I guess he's the most expendable. In hindsight, yeah. I can't argue. But like, people are going to remember those two matches, and obviously, like, they're different, right? I mean, like, Foley got thrown off and it's like, who knows what happens? And it's like, oh, that was, he almost dies, but then he continues, and then he almost dies again. And like, obviously Foley is the kind of wrestler with the kind of mentality, and we've read several of his books at this point where you know that he was gonna, endure that pain and have that moment. Whereas, the Cody Rhodes one, it was a little less like cut and dry of, oh, of course he's going to do this. It's like, well, a lot of the discussion when you found out he was injured before the match, and then when the match happens, still, it's like, well, how badly is this injury, and is this an injury where it became more about like, is this something that you could actually wrestle on, and is it going to stop the match? And then when the gasps, seeing that like black and blue like torn pec like area, it's like, okay, this looks really bad. Like, even though technically doctors were saying like, oh, you can do it, you're not going to make it better.
It'll hurt a lot, but you can go out there, yeah. But I mean,
Right.
it's also the mix of Foley gets hurt during the match, like a very obvious injury. It's not like he twisted an ankle, like they threw him off the cage. There was going to be injuries after that regardless. But that was a byproduct of the carnage they had planned out in advance. Like, Cody had the build up of will he or won't he, which is good, excitement building, a good catalyst to a show, great for social media, all those things, which I don't fault WWE for capitalizing on that part of it. Like, we'll never know what the backstage conversations are like, but knowing Cody from what we've read about him and seen about him, not surprised at all that he'd have the match. And once he decides to go, you milk that for all it's worth. Like, obviously then it just becomes an excuse to print money and get more eyeballs and sell the show. So I don't fault them for that. But I guess the larger question is like, how much of this is built into wrestling as an entity, like as a profession, as an obsession with a lot of these guys and girls? How much of it is just something they do without thinking, or are we in maybe a better place now than we were, where Cody is, Cody's also a businessman. There's no doubt about that. Like, I imagine he was thinking like, okay, like, I'm here, I'm at this new company, I want to make a good impact, I want to be in this main event, but also like, I don't want to end my career, I don't want to go out early just for this one match. So I like to think people are thinking more about the long-term effects, but I guess we don't know exactly what's going through their heads.
Yeah, and I think in this case too, like, not to like nitpick this one instance, but I think it's interesting to dissect in a sense that like it almost became a no-brainer because of the nature of the injury. But like, what's the decision if it's a partially torn pec? But in wrestling, it's like, he's out for 9 months and he can't make it worse, so go out and have a performance for the ages, even though the match was just like okay. But I'm not gonna like nitpick that.
It wasn't. But it wouldn't have, I mean, the spectacle and the injury were overshadowed the match for sure.
Absolutely, that's all people remember. That or the cowbell, but ultimately, that if the problem presented to them was, listen, you could have a quick procedure, be out for 3 weeks or X amount of weeks, or do the match and be out 9 months. Cody, you said Cody's a businessman, but like, WWE is a business. Do they, with their number one babyface, take that chance at that point? And it's hard to really say they will or they won't, or they would or they wouldn't have. But ultimately, I get the sense too that like, Cody is taking on a similar role that John Cena used to take on, where you can't tell him no. And I think the long-term effects of that are set a dangerous precedent for every other performer.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. You do wonder what the thinness of the roster, how much that contributed to Cody's decision, because Roman Reigns was not on that show. Roman Reigns has been despite winning both heavyweight titles and being the guy, he's taken a few months off, and good for him. You know, if you take it, if you can get it, like all wrestlers should get a few months off every now and then, in my opinion. But when you get that Hell in a Cell match, when you get that main event with Seth Rollins a few months after coming over from the competitor, it must be hard to say no. Like, I'm sure Cody was salivating at the opportunity. So I don't know, but wrestling is such a weird beast in that regard because, you know, so many throughout history, some things have changed on a dime when someone gets hurt, you know? Like, careers obviously end. Bret Hart's career ends because Goldberg kicks him in the head, basically the beginning of the end shortly thereafter. Shawn Michaels, you know, passes the torch to Stone Cold Steve Austin and disappears for years, despite, you know, beyond coming back every now and then, looking all pilled out as like a commissioner or a weirdo or whatever. Like, Kenny Omega's gone now for a year, you know, after passing the torch to Hangman to a certain extent. Like, Daniel Bryan misses years of his life. Like, wrestling is just it is built in and it is part of the job. But like, people, you can lose your spot if you don't show up. Like, that's a byproduct of the business, and that's also the cutthroatness that doesn't have to be there but usually is. You know, like, I'm sure there is an insane amount of weight on you to make your billings, even if it's not explicitly said you're going to lose your spot. Just if you're gone for 3 months, the show must the TV, you know, Dynamite doesn't stop airing, Raw doesn't stop airing. It's just they got to find someone else to do the job.
Yeah, no, and that's totally true. Ultimately, though, like we've seen in recent history as well that like some wrestlers will do that, and as a result, they get burned out that much quicker. I mean, like CM Punk and Sasha Banks are two that come to mind. Where, you know, in 2011 or I think it was 13, maybe. Sorry, I can't remember.
Yeah, a decade ago. Let's say.
Yeah, about 10 years ago when CM Punk first just left, it's like it was well documented that he was fighting through like all sorts of crazy ailments, and he's like, and when he came back to AEW, he's like, I was sick. I was really sick. I was never going to get better unless I just like straight up walked away. And I'm sure as a result, he had a chip on his shoulder and became a surly talent because he's doing this when he's all hurt, and eventually you reach a tipping point where you just like I'm so done with this. And then we lose CM Punk for 10 years. It's like Sasha Banks is very similar. Where, what was that, last year, 2 years ago? No, I can't remember.
Yeah.
2019.
Your vaunted wrestling memory is not as good as it once was, huh?
No. Especially with Sasha Banks. We just did that.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, when she was fighting injured for the sake of the women's tag titles, the illustrious women's tag titles, and then she just was like, this is not worth it. Like, this is like, I need to get the hell out of here. And like, now, obviously what's happening now, she might actually be released. But there's plenty of, I'm sure, examples of beyond that of talent who just will wrestle hurt. And, you know, I'm not even going to go into the
William Regal, we also just covered him recently. Like, guy didn't even know he was hurt for years and kept showing up because he's that kind of guy. And, you know, doesn't happen to everybody, fortunately, but, you know, becomes a incredible drug addict in part to handle the pain that he was feeling.
Okay, well, I was going to say I'm not going to get into the pain element, addiction.
Well, I don't want to get. I agree. I don't want to get too much into like the mental health side of things, or like what. Or I don't want to say X always leads to Y, because that's not how it goes. But it's certainly, you can't deny that it does seem to be a contributing factor to some extent with a lot of these things.
Right, and ultimately it just leads down. It just produces talent that is, you know, unsatisfied, and then it leads to either them leaving or like them getting really hurt or just a worse product ultimately. Like, you need your stars to kind of like take a beat every once in a while, unless you're John Cena, in which case you never do.
Or my boy Terry. You know, I was in thinking about this episode and thinking about, you know, the big injuries that I sort of listed off and the ones we've covered or read about in books and documentaries. Hulk Hogan is one of the weird constants. Like, I know he had a style that was conducive to not really getting hurt. Like, he didn't take any risks at all if he could help it. But he was out there a lot, you know, for decades. And I don't recall him really ever missing a huge chunk of time. There's other guys who work safe styles like that, and they get hurt eventually or something goes wrong. And Terry, for all his faults, he persevered for quite a long time.
I mean, he did take a few hiatuses to go to Hollywood, brother.
Yeah,
But
well, he had to make the Three Ninjas race to Witch Mountain or whatever. So
oh wow, that's a deep cut.
it's on HBO Max. That's why I know it. I was flipping through it last
Okay, well, there you go.
but yeah, I mean, I know Vince McMahon didn't invent wrestling. Vince McMahon is just the most successful promoter of all time. So he didn't come up with this. He didn't build the mindset that everybody has, but he has influenced it more than anybody. And obviously Vince is one of those guys. If you've read anything about Vince, like when you get really really hurt, Vince is there with generosity. You know, he gives you time off. He'll pay for your rehab. He'll pay for your major surgeries if you get them in the ring. Like he does do the quote unquote right thing at certain points. When I would argue the right thing is a necessity to do. But he also has a tendency, and again, more long ago, but I imagine it's still there, to run people. You know, they run lots of shows. They run probably more shows than they need to. They don't give you time off unless you ask for it. There's no built-in off season. Like they keep you going until you break down or until you ask for help, you know? And I wonder how much of that is Vince's doing. Like, is Vince just perpetuating what has been going on in the territories before him, and now he's just doing it in his own consolidated way? Or is this sort of a Vince McMahon ethos himself that has now permeated the rest of wrestling? You know, like, is Tony Khan better? Like, I don't, that's a question I can't really answer. I doubt you can either. We can guess. But, like, I really wonder how much of this is WWE doing it the WWE way and everyone else following suit, or whether this is just inherent to wrestling, that it's a physical job, and so you're going to get hurt, and there's really nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Vince is to blame for every wrestler who has ever said, I'm going to wrestle injured ever. I see what you're saying with regards to, like, when you have the world's biggest wrestling company, and especially, I'm sure, in the 80s and early 90s, when it was like, it was pretty much the only game in town, to the point
and they were
where,
doing double shots constantly, and it was like the grind was even more ample than it is now.
right, where the understanding was like, you know, there's Hulk Hogan, and then your spot is just as replaceable as the next guy after that. And so I think there's a lot to be said there. But ultimately, though, people who were trained in the 80s were raised on and trained by people who were wrestling in the 70s. And, you know, those old ways have permeated for so long, where it's like you always wrestle hurt, and you have to, like, if you can't do 8,000 Hindu squats and then take 8,000 back bumps, you're not a wrestler. It's like, well, what about, like, being able to do wrestling moves? Like, nope, that's not right. You need to be able to, like torture yourself physically, and
then we'll teach you a hip toss.
Right. So, like, I feel like that old school mentality, and it still does exist. I mean, I'm sure it exists in AEW to some extent, and maybe that's something that Tony Khan can QC and control and quell, or maybe that's something that, you know, some of these people always live with, and that's just kind of like always going to be there. I hope not. And I think we're starting to see it kind of change or evolve for the better. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Kenny, like mentioned Kenny Omega, he's been gone for what, bunch of months now, 6 months, 7 months, and like, seems like he's taking the time he needs to get well, which is great. He's been killing himself for years now, and like incredibly vicious matches. So that's a guy who obviously really needs it, and I'm glad he's able to take it. But he's also one of AEW's top 3-4 guys, so. Usually those guys seem to be afforded a little more luxury, you know, a little more. And even if it's not like explicit, you have this luxury. I don't think Kenny Omega has to worry about his spot on the card when he comes back. You know, I think he's pretty well set when he decides to return. I don't know if the same can be said for like Ricky Starks or someone like that. Like if he were to disappear for 6 months, I'm sure Tony Khan would be. Or I imagine Tony Khan might be a little chiller than Vince McMahon. That wouldn't surprise me. But what does Ricky Starks do when he returns in 6 months with like the bloat on that AEW? You know what I mean? The largeness of that AEW roster. Is there a spot for him? Like that seems like something that no promoter can necessarily fix.
Right. I mean, I'm trying to think of. I mean, Orange Cassidy just came back as of last night, and I'm not, maybe Ricky Starks and Orange Cassidy are two different playing fields. I don't believe so. I think they're pretty similar, I guess, stature in the company, but ultimately it's like, you know, I think that like AEW's been in existence far shorter than WWE, and I'm sure someone listening who is an ardent WWE fan will just be like, "Well, listen, in '97, this guy did this thing and came back from injury and was given there." It's like, all right, like sure, you got me, but like I will say though that there are plenty of recent examples of like a Miro or a Ray Phoenix who get injured and they're allowed to step out and recover, and it's been 6 months or 4 months for Phoenix and 6 for Miro, and they come back and it doesn't seem like their position on the card was taken away from them. And I think it helps too because the way they book, there's always groupings, and so if one person is gone and the group is still doing stuff, and then someone comes back, I think that helps too with regards to like keeping people like top of mind, and so that when they come back, there's still that place for them, and there's less need to be like I have to power through because what is the death triangle going to be with only two people? It's like it seemed to continue without the third person, so we're good.
And you touched on something with Orange Cassidy coming back, which was a nice little return. Like it was, he's a smaller scale guy, literally, and in wrestling. But the crowd certainly popped when they heard his music. They hadn't heard it in a little while, and they responded accordingly. And that is one of the byproducts of these injuries. Like it's not the plan, but some of the most iconic moments are when a guy or a girl returns from a long absence. Like it's super exciting. Like especially the Royal Rumble. Like I love what you and I, before we've gone to various Rumbles together and hanging out, watched those YouTube clips, the best Rumble returns, the best returns in general, and it's the Cena coming back at the Rumble, H coming back, Edge coming back now. Like these injuries, as shitty as they are for the people, because you want them to do their job and they want to be healthy. It does. There's the byproduct of an amazing moment where we've forgot about them a little bit, at least to we want to see them and we've been deprived that for months. They come back and everybody goes crazy. Like you can't manufacture that. Like even if you just sent them away for a little while, it wouldn't be the same. Most people know when someone's gone, so it's not good. You don't want to tear a tricep or whatever, but it does. The moments when they do bring them back the right way are pretty transcendent.
Yeah, I mean they do make for the best moments in wrestling, period. I think in the case of Edge is a good case study because it's like while his return has been a miracle, and I'm sure by some doctor standards, and for wrestling it's been an incredible comeback. The guy in his book is or in interviews or both, he's talking about how he atrophied in his arm, and because his neck was so messed up, and he couldn't feel his fingers or in certain ways during the height of his or during the end of his last run before he just retired for 9 years. It's like, I mean, I think the thing that people are starting to ask now, which is why Daniel Bryan is still wrestling and not like dead, but like serious with his issues, is like because of like, oh well, we could have this guy for many more years if he just takes a step back now before it gets too bad. It's like where's the tipping point? And would WWE have sacrificed 10 years, 9 years of Edge, however many years it was, for this run now, or would they have wanted him for the last 10 years? Like, I would assume the latter, but I think ultimately they'll like Edge is a great example because, death by 1,000 cuts led to like a 10-year hiatus. It's like 10 plus years, I should say. So it's like those are the real situations and circumstances where you really have to go like, you should not be powering through this. You should just take some fucking time off.
Yeah, and the I hope that the powers that be see these returns and see a Bryan and see an Edge and see a rejuvenated performer who can go into his older age now because he had that break, like, and the hunger is there, the creativity is there, the desire is there, like those things have only grown stronger over the decade in between. So like I really hope that resonates with the Tony Khan or Vince McMahon is if you give people the time they need, hopefully they don't need to ask for it, but certainly if they do, you get them back in much better condition. Like no one wants to see Edge with an atrophied weird arm. Like that sounds horrifying. Like I want to see Edge now, even if he's 50, out there doing cool stuff. Like that's what I want. I want a healthy, active, focused performer. Like, well, that's what we want to see. We want to see people at the top of their game. And in a business like this where you get hurt a ton, I really hope that becomes part of the process. Is realizing that a preemptive strike is going to get you a bunch of good moments on the back end.
Right, and it's kind of funny now because speaking of injuries and Edge, it's like Cody Rhodes was clearly going to be their top babyface. For the next year, longer. And when he goes down, it's like WWE's done such a poor job of like building a roster that can sustain. Because like to your point earlier, it's like injuries are a part of wrestling, and it's like as a promoter and organization, it's like how are you going to pivot? Because you could either you could do one of two things. You could just rehash old shit, or make new stars, or like a mix of both. And in WWE's case, like they had to like course correct with Edge to make him a face to fill this void of Cody because they didn't have anybody else in that spot or ready for that spot. And Kenny Omega has left AEW, and the title picture and the main event scene hasn't really changed a whole lot. It's not like, oh, Kenny's gone, I guess I'll stop watching. It's like, no, they put together many other main events. And same with Punk. They're subbing Moxley in, and I'm not like really flinching a whole lot. It's like, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, you're very right. Like, I mean, what WWE's doing with Edge in a very specific example here is just they're not only nuking this last 6 months of Edge build up, but they're probably inadvertently nuking Finn and Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley in the process. Because obviously Edge is going to murk this shit stable that only existed because of Edge, and they're all just going to go away. I find it very hard to believe that this Edge-based stable can survive without Edge. That seems like a stupid idea. So but I get why they have to do it, and then like you said, it's a lack of planning, it's a lack of building stars. Meanwhile, AEW, I mean, I don't love. I talked about Dynamite last night. Like, I don't. It's definitely bad timing to have your champion go down before sort of a rush job crossover pay-per-view with a rival company that's across the world. Like, I don't think that helps your. They barely had a build in the first place, and now I feel like they have nothing. They just like Chris Jericho's yelling out matches and interviews after things he wasn't even involved in. Like it's not the way I would say you build your pay-per-view. But like you said, we don't bat an eye. Like Moxley is Warren territory, but Moxley also rules. And if they had gone Kyle O'Reilly, if they had gone Malachi Black, if they had gone Pac, like those all things would have been pretty cool. Like they have a lot of guys that I would love to see get a shot at that top. And like the thing you could probably say, the biggest slam I think you could say on Hangman is like, and who I think we both like Hangman, but like there's so many guys who you would like to see also up there, like it's right. It's sort of like, well, Hangman's cool, but I like these 6 guys just as much. And so it's definitely to their credit when when Punk breaks his foot, you don't really lose a beat.
Right. I mean AEW is. This is about injuries. This isn't about necessarily the shape of the roster and the booking of said talent, but like AEW is pretty top heavy right now, and so as a promotion, that's the ultimate hedging of your bet. It's like keep a strong like main event scene with fresh matchups and like different stories and intrigue, and like you have MJF now, like who's probably ready to take that next step, but then you still have Jericho, who you could. I mean, I don't think he's winning the title anytime soon, but like you should have like a nice range and a nice crop, and WWE is not doing that. They are relying on like attractions that are tourists in the main event scene, and like as a result, when Cody goes down, you're really left to scramble. And to me, like I see WWE's reaction to this far worse.
Yeah, and or like make your tag teams, give your tag teams main events. You know, like AEW has done such a great job in making the Young Bucks feel as important as they deserve. So when they main event a pay-per-view or a Dynamite like last night, no one bats an eye. It's like, of course, the Young Bucks main event things. Like, they're stars. If WWE tried that, people would be like, what? Usos versus the Dirty Dogs? Like, that's not main event. That shouldn't main event even like a Superstars or a Velocity, you know? That doesn't have the same weight. So there is, you know, and again, we're not just praising AEW, but these things happen, and when you have a deeper roster that not only is deep but feels important, it makes these things a lot easier to go down.
Right, yeah. So, you know, injuries aren't going away, and it's how are you handling them, and how and what is the result? Because I don't think there's going to be any stars elevated on one side, and in the other side, it's this is a unique opportunity to give someone a shot that wouldn't have been given that 3 months ago. So
yep. Well, Walt, to wrap up here, our little injury chat, what do you think is the most impactful injury in wrestling history?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh man. I mean, probably Austin getting dropped on his neck by Owen Hart.
Yep.
Because that really derailed that guy's career more than he might have had a few more years on top, and who knows what the wrestling landscape turns into as a result. But I mean. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I certainly need more time to noodle on that, but
I was gonna say, and I mentioned it before, but I think just only because of the passing the torch element is Michaels back and having, you know, because I'm not, you know, I don't think I realized this until we started learning more about that era. I don't think I realized how much of a dick Michaels was at that point, and how there was a chance he might not even do the job for Austin. Like, that never crossed my mind. Like, especially when we were 14 years old. It's like, well, of course even then you knew Austin was winning the belt. But I don't think I realized how fraught things were at that point, and how, like, it was just such an obvious thing he had to do is take the L there and go and get well or retire. So like, I think it just made that a lot easier. And I'm sure Vince would have figured something out, even with his love for Michaels, he knew which way the winds were blowing at that point. But still, I think it just made that go a lot smoother. And then obviously from there, Austin's off to the races. And like, not that I don't love Michaels, and not that he didn't fit really well into parts of the Attitude Era, but it was Austin's time to go. And like, even if Michaels had hung around after that, I think it would have been awkward. You know, I think it was really fortuitous in that, for the sake for Austin at least, that it was just a clean slate after that, and he could just go from there.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, just when we talk about Edge's return after so many years and CM Punk's return, it's like that actually ended up extending Michael's career, because he needed that time off, and he needed that break, and he needed to get off the pills. And like, that was, I mean, I know that the pills also kind of was a byproduct of his back injury, but I think he was on pills before that.
He just needed time he had a variety of maladies he needed to take care of.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it extended his career as a result, an extra, like, however many years he went.
Yeah, and we got
8 years are bad right now.
And as fans, we got, you know, good, happy, functional, awesome Shawn Michaels. You know, like, he was less of a rabble rouser, and he got to entertain us for longer. Like, everybody won in that scenario, and I think everybody wins in most of those scenarios. It's just a matter of being proactive and doing the right thing at the right time. Yeah,
and hopefully, you know, as we continue down this road, we get less kind of Cena heroics with our stars, and just battling through crazy injuries and stuff, and more like, just be real and take the time.
Yeah, there's only one John Cena. He's a superhero. Like, no one else should try and be him. That's a bad idea.
Except for Cody Rhodes, apparently, who did his best impression.
I enjoy Cody Rhodes, but he's no John Cena. So. Well, if you want to hear more about a lot of the things we discussed on this episode, a wide range of topics, but most of them have been discussed already in our archives. You can find them at awesometruth.libsyn.com. If you want to hear all of our episodes from your various podcast players, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, you can subscribe to us on all of those wherever podcasts are delivered. And of course, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Walt, nice to talk injuries with you. Nice to leave the books behind. Nice to take our book knowledge and accumulate it and regurgitate it in a way that is both entertaining and informative.
Yeah, I mean, what good is this knowledge base if not to dissect actual persistent issues within this great sport?
Right. At least it burnishes our wrestling historian credentials, so that's something.
Got to.
Well, as always, thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.